Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. You know how this works. You send in the research, and we break it down. And today's paper is Role of Delay in Brain Dynamics. And I think this one's going to be particularly interesting, especially to folks in the AI space.
Yeah, absolutely. It really challenges, I think, some assumptions that we have about how computation works and, kind of points to this idea that these delays in the way our neurons fire might actually be a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, it's funny how we kind of marvel at how efficient the brain is. We
Yeah.
can learn new things, adapt to new environments, and it's not like we need a software update, or a hardware upgrade. It just kind of happens. And this paper is suggesting that maybe those delays are a key part of that.
Yeah, and it really contrasts with the way that we think about computation traditionally, right? Where speed and synchronicity are kind of the gold standard. And here we're seeing that introducing delays can actually improve performance in certain ways.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. For our listeners who are familiar with deep learning, how does this RoDiB model role of delay in brain dynamics? How does that differ from the kind of standard architectures that we're used to seeing?
So the key difference is that this RoDiB model incorporates multiple delays between layers in the network. So in a traditional deep learning model, you've got information flowing through the network in a very synchronized kind of step-by-step fashion. But in RoDiB, it's more like the brain, where you have signals traveling at different speeds, arriving at their destinations with varying delays.
So it's less like a perfectly timed symphony and more like, a jazz ensemble where each instrument has its own rhythm, and the beauty comes from the interplay of those individual
Yeah,
rhythms.
exactly. And the remarkable thing is that this jazz ensemble approach actually leads to a huge increase in the number of outputs generated by the system over time. So you have each input signal creating a kind of ripple effect with multiple delayed responses echoing through the network.
That sounds a little chaotic at first, but the researchers are arguing that this abundance of uh, time-based outputs, that's what gives the brain its flexibility and adaptability. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So imagine you're learning a new skill, like playing the piano. Your brain doesn't suddenly grow new neurons dedicated to piano playing. Instead, it kind of reconfigures existing connections and pathways. And this RoDiB model suggests that these time-based outputs, these delayed responses, could be crucial for that reconfiguration process.
So instead of rewiring the hardware, it's more about using these timing variations to create this kind of dynamic map of possibilities. It's like having a finite number of keys on a piano, but an infinite number of melodies that you can play by varying the timing and the rhythm of the notes.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And if you think about, the sheer volume of information that our brains process every second, from sensory input to abstract thought, this ability to reconfigure dynamically based on timing becomes essential for navigating the complexity of the world.
And this is where things start to get really interesting, I think, for folks in the AI field. Because the researchers actually found that in certain scenarios, and specifically tasks that involve a large number of labels, this RoDiB model actually outperformed traditional deep learning architectures. What are the implications of that?
Well, it suggests that incorporating delays into deep learning architectures could lead to significant improvements in performance, especially when you're dealing with complex, multifaceted data. And it challenges our assumptions about, what constitutes efficient computation. Because maybe these delays, which we often view as inefficiencies, maybe they're actually a source of computational power that we haven't fully tapped into yet.
So it's like the brain has figured out this trick that computers haven't quite grasped yet. And now with this RoDiB model, we're starting to kind of peek under the hood and see how that trick works.
Exactly. And the potential applications are vast. I mean, imagine AI systems that can learn and adapt more like humans do without needing constant retraining or reprogramming. This research could pave the way for a new generation of truly intelligent machines.
So we've kind of established that introducing these delays can lead to some pretty exciting computational advantages.
Mhm.
But how does this actually play out in, the intricate networks of neurons and synapses in our brains? What's the kind of biological basis for these delays?
Well, one intriguing area of research that aligns with these findings is a study of neuronal response latency. So the time it takes for a neuron to fire after receiving a signal.
So instead of assuming that all neurons respond instantaneously, we're starting to recognize that there's this inherent variability in their firing times, and that variability might actually be a feature, not a bug.
Precisely. And this variability, as we're learning, might actually be a fundamental feature of how the brain processes information. Think about it this way. Instead of every neuron responding like clockwork, perfectly synchronized, each one has its own rhythm influenced by, factors like its past activity, the strengths of incoming signals, even the presence of certain chemicals in the brain.
So it's not this kind of static uniform system. It's more like back to our music analogy. It's more like a symphony orchestra, where the timing of each instrument contributes to the overall complexity and the richness of the music.
Exactly. And research has shown that these variations in response times or latencies, they can have a profound impact on how neural circuits function.
Mm.
They can determine whether a neuron fires or not. They can influence the strength of the signal it sends. And they can even shape the patterns of activity across entire populations of neurons.
And that brings us to another kind of fascinating concept that's highlighted in this paper, this idea of population dynamics.
Hmm.
I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with the idea that, our brains don't rely on single neurons to process information. It's more about the collective activity of large groups of neurons.
Right. It's not about finding the one, super neuron that's responsible for a particular thought or action.
Hmm.
Instead, information is distributed across vast networks of neurons, and it's the combined activity of these populations that gives rise to our, perceptions, thoughts, actions.
So how does this concept of population coding relate to this idea of time-based computation that we've been discussing?
Well, if you think about it, the timing of individual neural responses becomes incredibly important in a population coding scheme. It's not just about which neurons are firing, but also about when they're firing relative to each other. Those subtle variations in timing can create complex patterns of activity across a population, adding another layer of richness to the neural code.
It's like a choreographed dance, where the precise timing of each dancer's movements contributes to the overall beauty and meaning of the performance. And those delays, those inefficiencies, might actually be essential for creating these intricate temporal patterns that underlie our cognitive abilities.
Exactly. And if we link this back to the RoDiB model, those multiple delay routes between layers could be seen as a way of simulating this population coding. Each delay route represents a different subpopulation of neurons firing at slightly different times.
And it's the combination of those delayed responses that allows the RoDiB model to achieve such impressive performance, particularly in tasks with a large number of categories.
Precisely. It's like the RoDiB model is learning to exploit the temporal dimension of neural activity using delays to create a much richer and more nuanced representation of the input than would be possible with a purely synchronous system.
It's remarkable to think that our brains might be doing something similar, constantly juggling multiple streams of information, each with its own unique temporal signature.
And it really challenges the way we think about computation. We often strive for speed and precision, minimizing delays, synchronizing everything as much as possible. But maybe those delays, that inherent messiness of biological systems, might actually be a source of computational power that we've yet to fully appreciate.
It's like we've been trying to force a square peg into a round hole by applying traditional computational models to the brain. But maybe the brain is playing a different game altogether, a game where timing and variability are key.
And that's the beauty of this research. It not only sheds light on the potential computational power of delays in neural networks, but also opens up entirely new avenues for developing AI systems that are more robust, adaptable, and ultimately more intelligent.
Speaking of intelligent systems, one of the most intriguing aspects of this RoDiB model is how it handles multi-label inputs, where a single input might belong to multiple categories. This is a challenge for traditional AI systems, as they typically require separate output units for each possible label.
Right. Think of a picture of a scene. It might have a tree, a car, and a person. In a traditional system, you need to be able to classify each of these things separately. But the brain doesn't seem to work that way. We experience the scene as a whole, recognizing multiple elements simultaneously.
And the research has found that the RoDiB model is surprisingly good at handling these multi-label inputs. How does it manage that?
Well, instead of having a dedicated pathway for each possible label, the RoDiB model leverages those multiple delay routes we've been talking about. Different combinations of labels can be represented by different temporal patterns of activity across those delay routes.
So it's like each label has a specific temporal signature, and the RoDiB model learns to recognize these signatures within the overall pattern of activity. It's a much more elegant and flexible solution than having to create separate outputs for every conceivable category.
Precisely. And this has significant implications for our understanding of how the brain processes complex real-world information. It suggests that our brains might be using these temporal delays to create a sort of dynamic map of overlapping categories, allowing us to recognize multiple elements of a scene, understand the nuances of language, and even navigate the complexities of social interactions.
Now, this RoDiB model is still a computational simulation. It's not a perfect replica of the human brain, but it does offer some tantalizing insights into how those seemingly random delays in neural signaling might actually be a source of incredible computational power.
And for those of us in the AI field, it's a call to action. We need to move beyond the traditional paradigms of speed and synchronicity and explore the potential of time-based computation. By embracing the messiness of biological systems, we might just unlock a new era of intelligent machines.
It's like our brains are saying, forget about your neatly ordered, perfectly synchronized systems. We're going to embrace the chaos, the variability, and use it to our advantage.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this approach might actually be more robust and adaptable in the long run. If you have a system that's highly dependent on precise timing, any slight deviation can throw everything off. But if you have a system that's built to handle variability, it's much more likely to withstand noise errors, unexpected changes in the environment.
It's like the difference between a finely tuned race car that's optimized for perfect conditions and an all-terrain vehicle that can handle bumps, mud, and unexpected obstacles.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And if you think about the challenges we face in developing truly intelligent AI systems, robustness and adaptability are paramount. We want systems that can learn from their mistakes, generalize to new situations, even handle unexpected inputs without, crashing or producing nonsensical outputs.
And this research suggests that incorporating those messy delays inspired by the brain's own computational strategies might be a key step towards achieving that goal.
Absolutely. Now, this isn't to say that we should abandon traditional approaches to AI development altogether. There's still a lot of value in precision and synchronicity, especially in tasks that require highly accurate and repeatable results.
You probably wouldn't want your self-driving car to embrace too much randomness in its decision-making process.
Exactly. But I think the key takeaway here is that we need to expand our toolkit, explore new paradigms inspired by the brain's own remarkable computational abilities. We need to be willing to experiment with different approaches, embrace variability, and perhaps even challenge some of our deeply held assumptions about what constitutes efficient computation.
So it's a call to think outside the box, to move beyond the binary world of ones and zeros, and embrace this kind of messy, dynamic world of neural rhythms and time-based computation. And who knows, maybe by embracing those inefficiencies, we'll unlock a new era of truly intelligent machines. Machines that can learn, adapt, and even surprise us with their creativity and ingenuity.
I think that's a great note to end on. This research is really just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm incredibly excited to see where it leads. Perhaps one day we'll look back and wonder how we ever thought we could build intelligent systems without embracing the power of time.
Well, thanks to everyone out there for joining us on this deep dive into the world of time-based computation. We'll be back next time with another fascinating paper, and until then, keep those neural delays firing, because as we've learned today, it's the imperfections that often make things truly interesting.